My name is Howard Blehm, and I enlisted in the regular Army on May 10th, 1941. And I joined up with a buddy of mine, Sig Baker. We had been buddies for years. And we stayed together throughout the whole war. We were in the same squad for 9 months at Fort Snelling, where we took our basic training. And then we were transferred to Bermuda for a year and a half. And Sig and I were we were in different companies then, but we were still together. And we were in Bermuda for a year and a half, and then we were transferred back to the States down to Fort Benning, Georgia. And that was when we were in Bermuda. Well, I got a leave to go home after a year, and so we were on our way, two of us. I've got a picture over there too of that.
Okay.
And
what'd you do in Camp Benning?
Fort Benning?
Fort Benning, yeah.
Well, I'll get there.
Okay.
When we left to come back to the States, and that's back in those days when the Germans were sinking ships right off the coast of the United States. And we were out to sea on the third day, and we were looking for the shoreline of the United States. And the sailor says, "What are you looking for?" Well, we thought we could be able to see the USA today. He just kind of laughed and he says, "You're not going to see the USA for at least 10 days. We're going to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, to pick up some survivors." Well, of course, my leave didn't start till I got to the States. And so we went to Guantanamo Bay and stayed there. Well, we didn't get off the ship. We were there for 3 days, picked up the survivors, and we headed back for States. We landed in Norfolk, Virginia, 10 days later. And then, of course, my leave started, and I got a bus up to Washington, D.C., and then got a train from there up to Minneapolis, my hometown, to help. And that was kind of a long ways around to get home for 30-day leave, but it's what happened. And Mary and I got married then, and it so happened that a buddy of mine was home from the Navy at the same time. We didn't know that. And so he was our best man at our wedding. And I got a picture taken back in about 1933 of Eugene and I. And I'll show that afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
Anyhow, then we got married, and we went up to the courthouse to get some gas stamps. And Fred Wicke, who was in charge, says, "Well, don't you boys know there's a war going on?" And I said, "Yes." I says, "I know. I just came back from a year overseas." "Oh, okay," he said, here's the gas stamps." So we had a good time. We drove around to Niche and Grafton and places in Pembina, and saw some old friends and so on. And We got back down to Halleck, and Mary and I were married on the 15th. It was on a Saturday. And Eugene and her girlfriend of Marion's stood up for us, and that was our wedding. We didn't have a big full wedding like they do today.
Where did you go for basic training at?
Which we took our basic training right at Fort Snelling.
Okay.
When we enlisted, there was a 300 or the 3rd Infantry Regiment stationed there, and that's the oldest active regiment in the United States Army. And we took our basic training with them, and which was very unusual, but we did. And we stayed there then for until in March when we went to Bermuda. But that's where we took our basic training.
Where'd you go overseas?
Huh?
Where did you go overseas?
Well, we overseas.
Germany?
No, I went to the Pacific.
Oh.
We went to when we got back to the States, we went to Fort Benning, and we were stationed there for 6 months. And we did maneuvers and stuff, so the training of the new officers were part of what we were doing.
I see a lot of medals in your case. Did you have, you must have been in combat someplace.
Oh, yes.
Whereabouts?
Well, I'll come to that.
Okay.
She did when we lost my...
When you left Fort Benning, did you go?
Well, when we left Fort Benning, it was a strange thing. They had broken up our battalion, and they had shipped out all the lower-ranking buck privates, and then corporals and sergeants went someplace else, and there was about 60 of us that were non-commons, first sergeants, staff sergeants, tech sergeants, and they transferred about 60 of us to the 77th Division, and they were stationed at Camp Pickett, Virginia at the time. So we went there in end of January, and then by the end of the month we were on our way to California to be shipped out. We went to Pittsburgh, California, and stayed there for, I don't know, a week or whatever it was. We had our picture taken there.
Okay, we'll look at that in a little while. We'll look at this a little later.
Yeah, okay.
We'll find you in here.
Yeah, I'm right down in here someplace.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
While you're in California, you're about to get on a ship?
yeah, well, we shipped out of California, and then we got to Hawaii. We were there for May, June, July, and took our jungle training on Oahu, and we had a lot of good times in Hawaii.
And where'd you go after Hawaii?
Well, when we went from Hawaii, we went to Guam, and we went into action there. We waded ashore in water about 3 feet deep, and that was on the south end of Guam. Guam is a big island, and we landed on the south end, and we did patrol duty and fought our way over to the east coast and secured the island. But we didn't have, we didn't really have much contact with the enemy soldiers because they were all concentrated more up in the north. And there was an airstrip right there on what they call the Oroto Peninsula, and that was loaded with Japs. And the Marines took that. They fought for about 4, 5, 6 days, and they finally captured the airstrip. And then when we stayed on Guam and until it was the end of October, I guess. Yeah, and then we were headed for New Caledonia to be for what they call R&R, and we got down off of the coast of Guadalcanal, and we had already crossed over the equator line. We got down off of Guadalcanal, and we received orders to turn around and go up to the Admiralty Islands, and we got resupplied. And so we pulled into the Admiralty Islands, and my brother was in the Navy, and he was stationed there on the Admiralty Islands. He was in communications. So he knew that the 77th Division was in the harbor, but he didn't know what ship I was on. So he went out to the shore, the landing area, and asked around if anybody knew what ship Company K of the 305th was on. And the sailor says, you know, I think they're on our ship. He said, why don't you jump on, we'll run back out and see you. So he did, and of course we had nothing to do in those days. We were just passengers on the ship, you know. And he, first thing I knew over the intercom system, it says, Sergeant Blehm, report to the bridge. And I thought, gee, now what am I being assigned to? Well, I got up, of course, and here was Arnold. Couldn't believe it. Mm-hmm. And of course, we had a real nice visit. And then he told me that my wife Marion had given birth to a little girl on the 22nd of October. And I didn't know that yet. Hmm. And so anyhow, that's how I found out about that. And then we went to the Philippines. We landed on the east coast of Leyte, on the same beach where MacArthur walked in through the water. And of course, that was all secured, and that was on Thanksgiving Day. And there were ships off the shore. The bow would be sticking up here, and the tail end would be sticking up like that. There were about 8 or 10 of those ships that had been sunk. And so we went ashore and bivouacked there on the east coast for about a week, I guess it was. Then on December 7th, at 7:07, on December 7th, the 3rd anniversary of Pearl Harbor, we were loaded on ships and we sailed around the south end of Leyte and up the west coast, which is now behind the Japanese lines. And we landed at Ormoc Bay. And we didn't have much resistance going in because we caught the Japs absolutely by surprise. And I thought, well, we didn't have much trouble going ashore right there. And we got in, and 2 days later, well, we had some Jap Zeros came over and strafed us, but nobody was really hurt as I know of at that time. And then on the 10th of December, we started moving up, and we had moved up about maybe 40 miles, and we ran into a hornet's nest. We got almost wiped out, my company. In my platoon of 54 men, I was one of the 11 that didn't get killed or wounded. And that was really the worst battle that we had been in, because they attacked us 3 or 4 times and we repelled them. We met right on the top of a ridge, and my company happened to be on the outside, and we come to the top of this ridge, and the Japs started throwing hand grenades, and we threw them back. But our company at that time was almost wiped out. We had points of what, 15 and 20 sergeants on that picture that were killed. And it was just tough going. And finally then we got secured, and we captured the headquarters of General Yamamoto, and his guards were all 6 foot at least, and they were a special Marine brigade that was protecting the general's headquarters. So that's what we ran up against. And then we came back and we went to the Karama-Reto Islands, which are 25 miles south of Okinawa. And we landed there on this little group of islands. About, I suppose there's probably 30 little islands in the group, but only about half of them were occupied. We landed there on the 25th of March, and that was a week before the attack on Okinawa on Easter Sunday, April 1st. And we captured those islands, and we destroyed suicide boats. And I got a picture there of them, one of the boats, and they were about 20 feet long, or maybe a little more, but they weren't big boats. But they had a 55-gallon drum of explosives on the bow, and one on each side, and they were designed to just drive into the side of a ship and sink it. Like the Canadians call it planes later on. But, my platoon was credited with being the first platoon to land on Japanese soil. And so we were there for a few days, and we went back on board ship, and we went to Aishima. That's another island just west of Okinawa, about 3 miles from Okinawa itself, but it had a big airstrip on it. And we landed there, and that's one day, the first day we were there, we landed on the southeast coast. And we were going ahead, and I had spotted a machine gun on the other side of the airstrip. So I called for a BAR man, Hyman Wasserman was his name, which said the BAR was a Browning automatic rifle. It wasn't a machine gun, but it had a clip of 50 rounds. And so I called Wasserman up, and I was pointing with my left hand, and he came, and we were kneeled down on the ground, and before this happened, going in, I had 2 different Japs in foxholes that blew themselves up rather than be captured. And we went in a little further, and a Jeep came back, because we had, the 77th had landed on probably 10 or 12 different beaches all around the island. So it wasn't that we were the only ones in action. And when I saw these Japs blow themselves up, I couldn't believe it, but that's what they did. And we went a little further, and there was a Jeep that came across the runway from the north side with a driver and a doctor or a medic and 2 wounded men on stretchers and a medic on the back. There were 5 of them on that Jeep. They drove over a 500-pound bomb that the Japs had buried in the runway. And I saw that Jeep disappear. Arms and legs flying and parts of Jeep, wheels, you name it. But they were all 5 killed. And so left a hole there in the runway about 35, 40 feet in diameter and 20 feet deep. Just a horrendous explosion. Well, then I went a little further, and I spotted this Jap machine gun. So I called for Hyman Wasserman, the BAR man, to come up and lay in some fire on him. So and we were kneeling down on the ground, and we had our heads right together. And I pointed with my left hand where the machine gun nest was at. And the next thing I knew, we were both down on the ground. He had been picked off by a sniper and killed right there. And I had my arm around his shoulder, and I pointed with my left hand, and I called for a medic, came up, and he says, well, there's nothing I can do for him, he's dead. But he said, let me take care of you. And I said, well, I'm all right. No, you're not. He said, did you look at your arm? And I had a bullet, the bullet that killed Wasserman had creased the back of my hand that I was pointing with. And I've always thought that bullet was meant for me instead of him, because I was the leader. I was in telling him what to do. And so he patched me up, and I got taken back down to the beach for waiting to get loaded onto a hospital ship. And Ernie Pyle, the famous war correspondent, had just come from Germany. And he was with my company commander and a couple of other officers. I didn't talk to him, but I saw him, he was right there. And the next day, he was killed by a sniper. And I've often wondered if that was the same sniper that nicked me and killed Wasserman, which I'll never know. Anyhow, he was killed the next morning. And I got pictures in my book of the memorial that they set up for him. And of course, he's buried now in Punchbowl Veterans Cemetery on Oahu. And I visited his grave 15, 20 years ago. One time we went to Hawaii. And then when I went to the hospital ship, and I was there, I think it was, I really don't know, I think it was on there for about 2 weeks. And of course, the Japs at night, you know, they were dive bombing and suicide planes into the ships at night. And I can hear the guy on the hospital ship. Of course, it wasn't a hospital ship like you see with big white ships, and this was just an ordinary little hospital. And the guy would say, hold your fire, hold your fire. Do not shoot unless it's headed for the Rixby. Do not shoot unless it's headed for the Bixby. And anyhow, then I got back on Okinawa right around the 10th of May, or a little before that. Maybe I was there 3 or 4 days before I got hit. And I had joined my company then, and we were up on it wasn't an escarpment, but it was a real rough hill. And so that morning I was assigned, we knew there were a bunch of Jap caves down below us, but we didn't know if they were just caves or if there were people in it or what. So I took 8 men and we went over the edge with Bangalore torpedoes. And that's an explosive device that's about 5 feet long and 2.5 inches in diameter. And we took those Bangalore torpedoes over the hill and down, and we pushed one into each one of the caves and blew them up. And then we came back up, and the hill was so steep you couldn't walk or crawl, you had to run to get up there. We got up on this, back on top of the ridge, and this was late in the afternoon, and somebody had a little fire going. So I opened up a can of beans, and we always used to just leave a little bit left on the cover, and then we could, I reached over and down to pick up that can of beans, and at the instant that I put my fingers on that can, artillery shell landed right at the fire. I can still feel that can in my fingers, but I can't move my fingers. And that blew my arm off, collapsed my lung, put some shrapnel down in my spleen. I carried that shrapnel in my spleen for 11 years. In 1940 or 56, it festered up and started draining a little slot up here where it had gone in. And I went to the VA hospital in Fargo, and they took it out after.
Now, when that happened, did they ship you home, or did you stay there?
No, I was unconscious for 5 days.
Oh.
And they finally brought me to, or let me come to, and the doctor says to me, "Well, Sergeant, how would you like to go home?" And I said, "I'd like it." I said, "But, well," he says, "if I'm going to have to take your arm off." I said, "Well, that's what you have to do, that's what you have to do." So they amputated my arm, and I stayed in that field hospital for about 5 or 6 days. Long. I was there probably 10 days altogether. Finally, they loaded us up on a ship to go to Saipan, to an army hospital there. And the next day, I got up on a bed. Well, I was still completely out, but I decided I'm going to get up and go for a little walk. Well, I got up and I made about 2 steps and down I went. And then they found out that my right lung had been collapsed. So I got to Saipan then, and they did surgery on my lung. And I stayed on Saipan for about 2.5 months before I finally got evacuated back to the States. And I can remember when that shell exploded, I could hear one guy's name was Wolf, and he'd been blown back down the hill on the other side, and the guys were talking, but I don't remember, but I can still kind of hear it, the guys hollering and stuff. They got me back into bed. We got to Saipan, and they did surgery on my arm, on my, they did a re-amputation on my arm, and then they fixed my lung. And I stayed on Saipan for 3 months, and finally we got shipped back to the state of Oregon. We flew home. And of course, in those days, there were no big jet airplanes like there are now. The C-54 was the biggest civilian plane there was. It was a 4-motor plane, and not very big. And so we got loaded on stretchers, and we were stacked up. I was up on the top one, and I happened to have a little porthole next to me. I could see, but nothing but water. And so we flew to Inuiatak and refueled, and then we went to Kwajalein and refueled. And then we went to the Johnson Island, which is west of Hawaii, about 500-600 miles, I guess. And we went there to refuel. And I'm laying up in that top stretcher and looking out, and all I can see is water. Plane was going down, all I could see was water. We landed then on Johnson Islands, refueled, and I found out later from a Navy SEAL that had been stationed there. And he said, well, he says, you know what? Why? He said, the elevation of the Johnson Islands is about 9 feet. It was big enough for an airport. It was 9 feet above water, and that's all I could see. I thought we were all done. So anyhow, we got back to Hawaii. I think we stayed there 2 days before they reloaded us and on a plane and flew us home. And we went to Fairfield Suicide Field in California. It's just north of San Francisco. And I landed there, and then the next day they loaded about, I don't know how many, but it was probably 30 of us onto a C-47, which had 2 motors, and we flew to Hill Field in Ogden, Utah. There was an Army amputee center at Brigham City, just north of there. And going over the mountains, one of the engines on the C-47 quit. So of course the pilot, he just feathered the prop. We went a little sideways, and we went like that the rest of the way. The next day, when we got landed, we had, there were 4 black men on there, and there were leg amputees. When we got off the plane, I heard one of them say, man, he said, we started out with 4 motors, and we're down to 2, and now we're down to 1. He said, I'm going the rest of the way by train. I don't know if they ever did get him back on the plane or what. That's that's what he said. And so then I went to Brigham City, Utah, the Army Hospital, and I suppose there were 500-600 of us amputees. Most of them were leg amputees. And they did surgery on my lung, and it wouldn't heal up, wouldn't heal up. I got to take a 30-day leave almost right away to go home, which I did, and my incision had opened up, and there was what they call proud flesh growing out. It would grow out about an inch, and then they'd take a knife and just cut it off. There's no feeling in it. It's just what they call proud flesh. No feeling at all in it. So I went home, and when I was home, I went to my Dr. Berlin in Hamilton, and he trimmed it back down again for me. And then I went back to the hospital, and then at Christmas time, I got another leave to go home, which I did, and went back to the hospital. And I got back to the hospital, and they had a new chief of staff on the surgery department. And he took one look at me and he says, "And I'll operate tomorrow morning." So, and the other doctor, they said, "Oh, you can't go into the chest cavity any more than you have to," and all that stuff. But anyhow, he operated the next morning. And when the medics had taken the stitches out, she had one rib removed, and the incision was about a foot long. Here was a string of sutures about 10 inches long inside that had not been removed. So I took that out, my chest healed up, and then I was there for January, February, and I was discharged in on March 7th. So I had a long hospital stay for something that shouldn't have happened, I guess. But anyhow, got home, and then when I was home in August, of course, was when they dropped the bomb and the war ended.
How'd you hear about it?
Huh?
How'd you hear about the bomb being dropped?
I can't hear you.
How did you hear about the bomb being dropped? Who told you the bomb was dropped?
The doctor.
Oh,
I have no idea. It was just a surgeon in the field hospital.
but he told you.
He said, "Oh, take your arm off."
No, how did you know that the bomb was dropped on Japan?
Oh, well, because it was news then, you know. I was home, of course, and then what was it, August 12th, I think it was,
Okay.
when they dropped the bomb.
Now you have 2 Purple Hearts.
Yeah.
Is that for the landing in the island with damaged your arm?
Well, yeah, one was for, I've actually got 3, but I hit the back one time with a little bit of shrapnel, but it never, it was hospital, just a little shrapnel, and dug it out and put a Band-Aid on it. And then when I got wounded on Aishima, and then finally on Okinawa. after I'd been on Hiroshima, when I was out on that hospital ship, a kamikaze plane hit the ship that all of the regimental officers were on board. And it hit right at chow time when all the officers in our regiment and all the officers in the Navy were in having supper. And a bomb or a plane hit. It had 2 bombs, and it went down through 3 decks before they exploded. Killed every officer on board that ship. Every one. And killed all the officers in our regimental command except 2 guys, J. Rockefeller, who was the commander at one time, and the chaplain. Those were the only 2 officers that were not killed. And the ship was dead in the water the next day. Dead in the water. And
What kind of ship was it?
well, it was just
Hospital ship?
just another
converted?
ship, a big ship, you know.
Okay.
I don't know what kind. I never did see it, but. And then after I was released from that hospital ship, I came ashore, and there was 3 of us together, and we had to just make our way back up to the front lines. And one night, it took us 2 nights. The first night, the artillery fire was from both sides was so damn intense, it just was impossible to even think. So the 3 of us crawled into a tomb, big round tomb with a shelf about a foot high off the ground and all the urns sitting around it, and it was built like a igloo would be inside. It was round, and we spent the night there because we.
This is where again? Whereabouts?
Well, that was on Okinawa.
Okay.
Yeah, this was after I got off the hospital ship and was heading back to my company. I'm going to talk about Bermuda when I first got there.
Sure.
We were stationed in a Castle Harbor hotel, actually, and Bermuda is a small island, 42 miles long and a half a mile wide at the widest place. And there's a train that runs from one end to the other, and I rode it a couple times. But one time when I was on there, there was a lady on the train, and she lived way on the south end of the island, and her daughter lived up at Castle Harbor, or at St. George, and it was about 42 miles between them. And she was going up to see her daughter for the first time in about 35 years.
Sure.
It had been on it. On Bermuda at that time, there were no cars. There was a doctor on the island who had a car, and nobody else had a car. You went by bicycle or by a horse and buggy carriage. And so we were the only ones, of course. About the Army came in, and we had trucks and stuff at our disposal. And
how long were you there?
I was in Bermuda for about a year, not quite a year and a half.
Why did they send you to Bermuda?
Huh?
Why did they send you to Bermuda?
Well, there was no airfield there at the time. And on up at St. George, which across the water over to Castle Harbor, I suppose was about 6-7 miles. And they dredged up the coral rock from the bottom and built an airstrip, and it's still there. And
is that the reason you were there? Because
that's the reason we were there. We were doing guard duty.
Okay.
And
where'd you go when you left Bermuda?
well, I'm not quite through here now.
Okay.
And when we were on Bermuda, somebody asked me one time how I was able to save up $500. And what I did was I worked in supply, and I would take a truck and go over to St. George and pick up used lumber that they had discarded from the concrete walls. And I built about 110 of them, footlockers, and I sold them for $5 a piece. Or no, we got paid in British money, so it was £4. It was a pound and 5 shillings, and a pound at that time was worth $4, and the shilling was worth 20 cents. I don't know what the pound is worth today, but it's a lot less than that. And I'd go into town, into the Hamilton, which is the capital, and the hardware store there, and I'd buy the hinges and the hats and stuff that I need. So that's how I was able to save money, and I'm able to get a leave to go home. And let's see. Yeah. And then after that was when I came back off my leave. Yeah, I was at Fort Hamilton, New York, and the plane, I had a ticket on the Pan American Clipper, and we flew out of the East River on that old 4-engine Pan American Clipper, or flying boats they called them. And my airplane ticket, and I still have the receipt someplace, was for $58.
To go from where?
One way.
From New York to where?
To New York to Bermuda.
Okay.
And then after I got back to Bermuda, of course, we were there only about 3 months, and then our company was transferred back to the United States. We went to Fort Benning, Georgia, and then finally we went to Camp Pickett, Virginia in January to join the 77th Division. And on Guam, when we
Wait a minute, you got the clock going off.
yeah,
We'll have to wait for the clock to stop. Cuckoo clock here. It'll be over in a second. Okay, I think it's done. You got Guam?
and when we fought our way from the west coast to the east coast, which was about a distance of 15 or 18 miles. And we hacked our way through swordgrass that was 6-8 feet tall. I mean, it was swordgrass. It was so sharp it just cut right through anything. So we got there to the east side, and after we'd been there for a day or two, the Japs had closed our supply line coming from the west coast. And we didn't have any rations for 3 days. So we lived off of bananas and coconuts, and then two guys would hold the catch the water down at the end of the leaf. And that was our supplies for 3 days. But we survived it without too much difficulty. And then a lady, after we got recovered from the battle at Kogan, we fought our way across a rice paddy for about 2.5 miles. And we were in that water, rice paddies, for 3 days. You couldn't even take your shoes off. If you took them off, you'd never get them back on. Your feet were swollen up. But at night, there was a fellow over in the 307th Infantry, and he was quite a ways away from us, but he was on the stage in New York, and he had a deep, rich, baritone voice, and he would stand up after everybody was dug in and sing the Lord's Prayer. And I've often wondered what kind of effect that had on the Jap soldiers.